It's the dead of winter and I am in Yellowstone National Park on a photography adventure. We set out hoping to see wolves, but what we found was so much more. In this episode, I go over my photo and video techniques, my camera settings, the gear that I use to be able to get all the shots and the video footage to make this trip a successful adventure to show with family and friends. I spent a full week in the park and I saw foxes, coyotes, wolves, bison, elk, white-tailed deer, mule deer, and a bunch of birds. And I have so much to show you. I flew from the tropical wet winters of Vancouver Island to the frigid temperatures of Yellowstone, where it was down to -8 Fahrenheit, which is -22 Celsius, to get you the best content and photos this place has to offer. Now I'm hoping to break down this adventure into a few episodes and show you all the amazing images and video footage that I captured, while sharing the behind the scenes, the gear that I use, the photo techniques, and the editing to get you photos like these. So be sure to subscribe so you can see all of those episodes. Morning everyone. It is freezing cold. It was we get to -7, I think, Fahrenheit. Just like -20 something Celsius. And there's a bison right there, frost all over its face and body actually. And yeah, there's wolves across the road here. We can't see them, we can only hear them. And I'm shooting on my 500 f4 with a tele. It's really cold. I've got these gloves with hand warmers in their little pouches. So thankful for the heat company for getting me these gloves before my trip. You can open them up so I can access my fingers when I need to. But it's beautiful. Sunrise here. So yeah, maybe we'll see the wolves. We definitely hear them. Get some good shots today. If you are new to this channel, my name is Shannon and I am a full-time photographer in beautiful British Columbia. Whether you're here to learn, be inspired, or simply enjoy some stunning visuals, you've come to the right place. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this. So I'm back after a successful trip to Yellowstone National Park. I got a lot of content, photos, a lot of great information to share with you about my experience there. Part of that is my camera setup. So I figured this episode I would talk about my camera setup, how I kind of got in and out of the vehicle, because there was stops along the way. He's having fun changing all of my settings on my lens. So if you have kids, make sure to double check because all of these buttons get changed. This is not the actual vehicle that we went with. It's smaller because it's my Jeep. But basically my setup, if I put this to the side, is really having my camera gear right here. And I have my lenses, I've got, extra batteries, that sort of thing. In the front, this is where I put my gloves, say if I need to warm them up or anything like that. They're easy access. And then over on the far right, if I didn't have anybody here, where I have like camera bags, just in case it's gonna be snowing, of course I would check the weather. My binoculars, this is usually in the center console. These crampons here, these go over my boots. This is really if you're on trails that other people have walked and it's melted and then froze. There was a lot of icy spots, but we were fortunate that there was some snow some of the days. Didn't really need these, but these can be a lifesaver where you're not gonna break a hip having those. And then these are gaiters. I actually only wore these once when it really snowed quite a bit. Normally I would have splash pants or waterproof pants over here, but these gaiters kind of go around and they hook into my laces. And it's just really great for deep snow. I didn't bring snow pants. I brought like long johns, these pants, and then my waterproof pants over top, so I can always layer up, layer down, that sort of thing. That is basically the setup for all of my other lenses. Now, if you back up here for a second, this get big guy is usually the issue. If you were just taking photos, having this on your lap, or if it was positioned sitting in place, this would be kind of between my legs. This is a lot easier to just get out and just take photos. But since I'm doing both photos and video, I found it a lot easier just to put it on a tripod, keep it on the tripod, and move in and out of the vehicle with this setup. This is where I would have it positioned, clicked in, and then the legs would be together. And in there, that can sit between my legs inside the vehicle. And then when we get out and we see the wildlife, I just gotta pop this out as fast as I can without, you know, not really making too much commotion. Release this to be able to bring it up to height, and then I can go and start photographing. Now that might sound easy enough to do, but when the action is really hot, this seems like a lot of time. So for the first couple of days, I didn't use my tripod. I did everything handheld using my steady hands and controlled breathing to try and video record everything. And some of the video record does quite well. There's some techniques that I use in post-processing to smooth things out, but it was definitely a challenge. Okay, let's talk about camera settings. I shoot manual mode with auto ISO. My shutter speed will depend on the subject that I'm photographing. Usually in the morning, if it's during twilight hours, I still keep it at around 1/640th of a second, just in case I want to freeze some action. And you know, you can always slow things down, but I keep it there, have my tripod ready so that I'm photographing mostly silhouettes of, you know, bison up on the hills with the beautiful color of twilight coming over the hill. So during the day, that'll get boosted up if it's coyotes or wolves, sometimes around 1,000th to 12/50th of a second for my shutter. And then for birds, it gets up to 2,000, 2,500, that sort of thing. My aperture is typically wide open. Now, I have an app called PhotoPills that I use to figure out my depth of field on my subject. Now, in Yellowstone, there are some rules. If you see a wolf or a bear, grizzly, you need to be 300 feet away from you know, that wildlife. If it is moose, deer, foxes, I think it's 75 feet is the minimum. And you can type that into your calculator as well as your focal length and your aperture, and it'll tell you what your depth of field is going to be. So for me, wide open was totally fine for those distances. And honestly, if the wildlife approached me and got closer, then, you know, you just hope to get the eyes. Now, my area of focus is usually wide open for, say, birds or you know, different wildlife species if it's a clear day and I don't have a whole lot of branches and things in the way. Now, here we have snow that's falling, and with snow, the autofocus is really difficult to kind of lock onto your subject, even if it's a bison that's, you know, quite dark. So I actually enjoy using WC1 on my Z9, and that'll get me this kind of rectangle box, and I can place that on my subject. Now for birds it's a little bit difficult, so I might switch it back to full area. But for wolves and bison and everything, this worked out really perfect to kind of tell the camera, no, focus on this little area. And I can also move it around easy enough using my little trackpad. Now, I usually keep my subject detection on sort of everything if I don't know what I'm going to photograph. But it's easy to switch it over to birds or to wildlife if I know that that's what I'm focused on. Now I shoot raw, and if you're a beginner and you don't do any post-processing work, you might as well shoot JPEG with some of the camera settings, like landscape or vivid, so that your images actually look good in camera and when you put them on the computer. If you shoot raw, it's there to preserve as much quality so that the artist, that the photographer could do some post-processing work to add its own, white balance, color, all of that. So if you don't do any post-processing work, maybe think about shooting JPEG. Okay, let's talk about exposure metering. My metering is usually set to matrix, which evaluates the whole scene. But if we take a look at my scene right now, I've got this giraffe that probably makes up for 40% of the scene. And the white clouds in behind, or let's pretend that that's snow, makes up 60%. Well, it's actually going to darken my scene right now. I've got exposure compensation on. So because of the snow that's around there making up for 60% of this scene, it's actually going to say, whoa, things are a little bit too bright, let's darken this. And now my subject is a little underexposed. And of course your camera doesn't really know that that's what you're trying to do, which is why they give you options. Now I could switch to center weight. So there's matrix mode. So if I click on matrix mode, it really makes my subject quite dark. If I pick center weight, you can see that it's brightened it up because now it's just metering my subject that's in the center and a little bit around the edges. Now even this, I'm going to be still holding down exposure compensation and brightening things up to the point where my whites aren't blown out, but they are bright. I don't want my snow to look kind of gray and evenly exposed. Snow is supposed to be white and bright, just like cloudy sunny days are typically quite bright fluffy clouds up in the sky with a blue sky. So between those two settings, center weight metering and matrix, is where I usually have my metering settings. Now if I was going to do matrix, which a lot of the times that's my default, my exposure compensation just might be a lot more or a lot less depending on the volume of dark matter or bright matter in my entirety of my image. So this might be a lot of nothing that I'm telling you because it's basically real world decisions that you're making. If the majority of the scene is white and bright, but it isn't your subject, then you're going to be underexposed and you need to bring up your exposure compensation. If the majority of your scene is dark and kind of black and it's not your subject, well then your camera's going to say everything is really dark and it's going to brighten it up and you need to use exposure compensation. So the biggest thing I will tell you to look at is your histogram. So I will set a metering setting, whether it's matrix or center weight. You just choose whatever works best for you. And I then make sure that my display has my histogram there. And this histogram will show me everything that is in my scene and where it lies on that graph. Obviously, if it is, let's go way up in the exposure compensation. If a pile's way up to the right, well then it's overexposed. If a pile's way over to the left, well then things are underexposed. What we want is to be somewhere in the middle with all of our information. So we don't want our snow to be blown out, but we also don't want our shadows of our subject to be into the black. So this is where I will meter correctly and take my photo. And you can see here that this doesn't look like a nicely exposed image, But there's enough detail there in the raw that I can make that all work in post-processing. And that's what we're dealing with. The dark bison in white fluffy snow. It's going to be just like this, where the dark bison is way over on the left and the white snow is way over on the right. And that's just the shot that you're going to have to take. So in post-processing, we work the highlights back down a little bit, bringing back a little bit more of those details. And then the shadows we can brighten up a little bit so we can see the subject a little bit better. Okay, here is a photo of a raven that's really, really dark, and then the snow, of course, that's really white. And if we go up to a histogram right here, you can kind of see the information on the far left, that is the raven, and then the far right, that is going to be the snow. And if we check these little boxes up here, this will actually tell us whether or not things are too bright. Like if I bring up my exposure, obviously it'll highlight it in red. And then if we go too dark, it'll start painting it blue. So we know that we have all the information here. Our edits are really going to be fairly simple, where we might bring up the shadows a little bit to see some of the details of the raven here, and we might bring down the highlights. Now, it might flatten the image, so this is where you're just going to have to do some work, maybe bring in some contrast. Maybe you might want to select your subject, which is the raven here, bringing up some of the highlights, maybe some contrast again. But what's important is that you get all the detail out of this image by taking that photo in the field without going too bright or too dark. So hopefully that makes sense. The metering, yes, choose matrix or choose center weight, whatever works best for you, so that in the moment you're properly exposing the subject the way you want it by looking at the histogram. I think the histogram is your best friend when photographing in the snow. And then manual focus with peak highlights is your next best friend when it comes to focusing, especially if it's snowing out. It's so hard to be able to nail focus using autofocus on even the most technical pieces of equipment, just because the amount of moving factors that are moving through the scene. So I got the 14 to 24, I've got the 24 to 70, 70 to 200 right here. So that captures everything from wide angle all the way up to kind of a small telephoto. And then right here, I've got a couple of bags here to keep moisture out. I've got my sound equipment right here, my lav mic from DJI. Then I've got the 500 f4, so that just comes out like that. And then on top here is a 1.4 teleconverter. Now I can put the 1.4 teleconverter on my 70 to 200. So the 500 with the teleconverter gives me 700 mils of reach at an f-stop of 5.6. Without it, it is a 500 f4. And I was very, very happy with this setup. Now this is an older lens. It's still great for autofocus, for its sharpness, but it is heavy, which is why I want to make sure that I'm bringing a tripod and a video head. Now I'm going to pack these in my suitcase, but all the important gear goes into here. Now you'll notice that none of my hoods are on the lenses. That's because it takes up too much space. Now the video camera that I'm recording on right now is my Sony a7C. That actually fits into this space right here. And then I've got extra Sony batteries that goes down into this pocket. In the very top here, I have a GoPro that has sort of a little clip here that I can clip onto things. I've got my Nikon spare battery, and this I keep with me to plug into the vehicle, so I make sure that I bring an actual charging case. I've got my Rode mic for ambient noise. I've also got this little guy. This little contraption holds my iPhone, but I can put it into the hot shoe of my camera so that I can kind of create a bit of a behind the scenes look at what I'm seeing, and then obviously what I see through my camera. And then on the side pouches right here, that's where I will put sort of my dry bags and even little towels if I need to dry things off. And then up at the very top here, this is where I've got more of those microfiber cloths. And in the little pouch here, I usually have a lens pen. I'm not sure where it is right now. Now, this is a 40-liter bag from F-Stop. That's where all my important camera gear and batteries go, and that can go into the overhead bin on the plane. Whatever can't go in that bag, that's where it goes into my suitcase, including these hoods. I'll stuff socks and stuff in here, and then this will go into my check bags. And then I have an Apple tag that is in my check bag as well, so I can actually see where it's moving through at the airport, so that if anything were to happen, I can let the airport know, hey, you didn't bring my bag with me on the plane. So my tripod would go in there, video heads, binoculars, that sort of thing. This would be how I have my camera set up, all ready to go. Because your first day, everything will be in its beautiful little compartment in your camera bag, and then you'll see action and your pants will be down at your ankles, and you'll be trying to put everything together to get the shot. So having things set up and ready to go before you even leave your hotel or wherever you're staying, I think is smart. Also, to have your settings set to fast action. You can always slow things down if it's landscape, but for wildlife, make sure that it's at a speed that you're comfortable with, in case your brain kind of goes into a different dimension and you kind of forget about everything and you're just trying to capture a shot. Because on one of our days, we didn't even expect it, within, I think, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, we seen a black wolf. It was out on the road and it was right there in front of us. And then there was another one to our left up on the mountainside. So those are where you kind of, your brain goes a little dumb and you start forgetting things. So this was my setup, where I would grab my gloves from the pouch here. You know, I would be checking for wildlife here, center console. And then my camera would be right here ready to go. So we would see something, I would grab my camera like this, and then I would see the wildlife and I would get right down into position. This is great for photographers. You can, lie down on the snow if you're fully geared up. And I could be in position. Now, as soon as I'm done taking the photos, or the driver says, all right, let's go, it's gone up the road or something, I can just grab this and then I can just jump back into the vehicle, 1 foot in, camera. And sometimes if I find that the floor of the vehicle is really dirty, I'll just put it on the seat with me. Now, when it's snowing, it's horrible for autofocus. It has such a hard time finding the wildlife, even if it's a bison that's really, really dark. So that's where on the lens, I'll turn it to manual focus, peak highlights would engage, and then I would just manually focus. Got it on camera now. So if you like this content, please give me that thumbs up, and if you aren't subscribed, think about subscribing. I've got more videos to share from my time in Yellowstone, so please stay tuned for more, and thank you so much for watching.